What would you do if the only home you had ever known was sold out from under you, and you were cast out with nothing but a pittance and the clothes on your back? What if, with that meager sum, you bought a place others saw as worthless, a burned and broken ruin on the edge of nowhere? And what if, hidden beneath the ash and decay of that forgotten place, a secret lay waiting, a secret that had survived the fire and held the power to forge a new life? Settle in, and let us tell you the story of Alara. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Alara was 19 years old the day her world ended quietly, not with a bang, but with the dry rustle of a deed changing hands. The house was no longer hers. It had been her grandfather's, a sturdy structure of stone and timber he had built with his own hands on a bluff overlooking the river. He had been a stonemason and a carpenter, a man who believed the world could be understood through the language of straight lines, right angles, and the unwavering honesty of a plumb line. From him, she had not inherited land or money, but something far more durable, knowledge. She inherited the feel of granite under her palms, the scent of fresh-cut pine, and the quiet satisfaction of a perfectly set dovetail joint. She remembered his hands, calloused and broad, guiding hers as she held a chisel for the first time. "Feel the grain, Ellie," he would rumble, his voice like stones shifting. "The wood tells you where it wants to split. You just have to listen." He taught her how to read the clouds, how to mix mortar that would outlast a man's lifetime, and how to find true north with a magnetized needle floating in a cup of water. He taught her that competence was a fortress, a shelter no storm could breach. After he was gone, the world became a colder, less certain place. Her father had died years before, a ghost of a memory, and her stepmother, a woman made of sharp edges and quiet calculations, had moved into the house. For 5 years, they had coexisted in a state of polite, frigid distance. Alara kept to the workshop, surrounded by the familiar smells of sawdust and oil, while her stepmother managed the accounts and entertained guests who spoke in hushed, serious tones. The day of the expulsion began like any other. Alara was in the workshop, carefully cleaning her grandfather's old tools, when her stepmother appeared in the doorway, blocking the morning light. She held a crisp white envelope in her hand. "The house is sold," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. It was a statement of fact, like announcing the time or the weather. "The new owners will be arriving in 3 days. You will need to be gone by then." Alara did not cry. She did not plead. The lessons of her grandfather had built a scaffolding of stoicism inside her. She simply looked at the woman who had shared her roof and felt nothing but a vast, hollow calm. It was as if she were watching a scene unfold from a great distance. She saw the dust motes dancing in the shaft of light. She saw the faint tremor in her stepmother's hand. She saw the resolute set of her own jaw reflected in the polished brass of a handplane on the bench. "I see," Alara said, her voice a low murmur. "This is for you," the stepmother continued, holding out the envelope. "A final settlement. Your father would have wanted you to have a start." Alara took the envelope. It felt insultingly light. Inside, she knew, would be a sum just large enough to be considered a gesture, but small enough to be a dismissal. It was the closing of a ledger, the final administrative act of severing her from her own life. She did not open it. She did not need to. The amount did not matter. She did not speak another word. Her stepmother lingered for a moment, perhaps expecting tears or anger, an emotional display to punctuate the transaction. When none came, she gave a small, frustrated sigh and turned, her heels clicking a sharp retreat on the stone floor. Alara was alone again in the sudden silence of the workshop, the scent of lavender from her stepmother's perfume a faint, cloying intrusion on the honest smells of wood and metal. For a long time, she just stood there. Then, with the methodical calm that was her inheritance, she began to pack. She did not take much: a change of clothes, a small block of soap, a tinderbox. From the workbench, she chose her grandfather's most essential tools: a small handsaw, a chisel set, a sharpening stone, and a leather-wrapped whetstone. Lastly, she took the object that was more her grandfather's soul than any other. It was a plumb bob, heavy and solid, turned from a single piece of brass. It was perfectly balanced, its point still needle-sharp, and it hung from a braided silk cord, darkened with the oil from his hands. It was a tool for finding the vertical truth of things, and in a world that had just tilted on its axis, it felt like the only true thing she had left. She placed it carefully in her canvas satchel, the cool, dense weight of it a small comfort at the bottom of the bag. On the third morning, as the sun was just beginning to burn the mist off the river, Alara walked away from the house on the bluff. She did not look back. To look back was to invite regret, and regret was a luxury she could not afford. The road stretched before her, a dusty ribbon winding into an unknown country. The journey took 4 days. She walked, her pace steady and tireless, through rolling hills that gradually flattened into a vast, wind-scoured plain. The nights were cold, and she slept rolled in her thin blanket, under the indifferent gaze of the stars. The satchel with her grandfather's tools tucked beneath her head. The world had shrunk to the rhythm of her own footsteps, the ache in her legs, and the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. The money from her stepmother's envelope, $100 in crisp notes, remained untouched in an inner pocket. It felt like cursed money, a payment for her own erasure. On the 5th day, she arrived in a town that seemed to cling to the prairie by its fingernails. A single dusty street was lined with a few weathered buildings, a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith's forge, and a building with a faded sign that read, "County Clerk." The town's name, painted on a leaning board at its edge, was Terminus. It felt appropriate. This was the end of the line. Inside the dim, cluttered interior of the general store, the air thick with the scents of coffee, leather, and dried apples, Alara bought a loaf of bread and a block of hard cheese. As she stood by the counter, she overheard 2 men leaning against a barrel of pickles. "Heard they finally put the old livery up for the back taxes," one man said, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into a nearby spittoon. $2. Can you believe it?" The other man laughed, a dry, rattling sound. $2 too much. Place is a death trap. Burned out near 20 years ago. Silas Kane's folly. They say his ghost still walks the ruins, looking for the partner who cheated him. "It's a pile of charred sticks and broken stone," the first man agreed. "Be cheaper to tear it down than to fix it, if the wind don't do it first." Alara listened, her expression unreadable. $2. It was a number so small it was an absurdity. It was a joke, but something in their dismissive tone sparked a flicker of defiance in her. A pile of charred sticks and broken stone. Her grandfather had taught her that there was no such thing as a worthless pile of stone. Stone had memory. Stone had integrity. She finished her bread, the dry crumbs scratching her throat, and made a decision. She walked across the street to the county clerk's office. The man behind the counter was small and balding, with spectacles perched on the end of his nose. He looked up from his ledger, his expression one of bored impatience. "Help you?" he asked. "I'd like to inquire about a property," Alara said, her voice quiet but firm. "The old livery stable." The clerk's eyebrows shot up. A slow smile spread across his face, a smile of pure amusement. He leaned back in his chair. "The Kane place?" "Lady, you don't want that. It's nothing but trouble." "I'm aware of its condition," Alara replied, her gaze steady. "I'm told it's available for the cost of the back taxes." The clerk chuckled, shaking his head. "That's right. $2. You got $2? He said it as if he were daring her. Without a word, Alara reached into her satchel. Her hand bypassed the envelope of paper money and found the small coin purse at the bottom. She withdrew 2 heavy silver dollars, worn smooth with time, and placed them on the scarred wooden counter. The sound they made was solid, definitive. The clerk's smile faltered. He stared at the coins, then at the serious young woman before him. He had expected a jest, But this was a transaction. Shrugging, as if the foolishness of the world was no concern of his, he pulled a large, dusty book from a shelf. He opened it, dipped a pen in an inkwell, and began to fill out a deed. His pen scratched across the paper, the only sound in the room. "Name?" he grunted. "Elara." He finished writing, sprinkled some sand over the ink to dry it, and blew it away. He tore the sheet from the book and pushed it across the counter. "There you have it. It's all yours. Good luck with the ghosts, girl." His voice was thick with mockery. Elara folded the deed and placed it in her satchel. She did not say thank you. She simply turned and walked out, the $2 silver still gleaming on the counter behind her. The livery stable stood on the western edge of town, isolated and skeletal against the vast, empty sky. It was worse than she had imagined. The great fire of 2 decades past had consumed it utterly. The roof was gone, leaving a jagged ribcage of charred beams open to the elements. Most of the wooden walls had burned to ash, and what remained was blackened and crumbling. The smell of old smoke, of deep, penetrating char, still clung to the air, mingled with the damp scent of rot and neglect. A wave of despair, cold and sharp, washed over her. The $2 felt like a fool's price for a fool's hope. What had she done? For a moment, she felt the urge to turn, to walk away from this monument to failure and never look back. But where would she go? The road behind her was just as empty as the one ahead. She took a deep breath, the acrid air stinging her lungs, and her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory. "Find the foundation. The bones are what matter." She tightened her grip on the strap of her satchel and walked through the gaping maw where the great front doors had once been. Inside, the scale of the destruction was even more apparent. Piles of rubble, ash, and wind-blown debris covered the floor. But as her eyes adjusted to the gloom, she began to see what the fire had not taken. The foundation was stone. The main support posts, massive timbers nearly 2 feet square, were deeply charred, but still stood, solid and defiant. The stall dividers were gone, but the low stone walls that had formed their bases remained. The bones were good. Her gaze swept the ruin, performing a silent triage. She was a survivor on a shipwreck, looking for a piece of floating wreckage to cling to. Her eyes settled on a section at the back of the structure. It appeared to be an old tack room, built entirely of stone, and it had been sheltered from the main blaze. Its roof had collapsed, but the 4 walls were largely intact, rising a solid 8 feet. It was a box of stone, a defensible position against the world. That would be her shelter. The work began immediately, driven by the simple, primal need for a safe place to sleep. She used her hands and a broken piece of timber to clear the rubble from the tack room, her movements methodical and efficient. She swept the floor clean with a makeshift broom of prairie grass. As she worked, the initial despair began to recede, replaced by the familiar, grounding rhythm of labor. This, she understood. This was a problem that could be solved with muscle and time. By dusk, she had cleared a small, habitable space. She used a fallen section of tin roofing to create a lean-to against the most solid wall, providing a shield from the wind and rain. It was not a home, not yet, but it was a foothold. That night, for the first time in almost a week, she slept with a wall at her back. The next days were spent in a slow, painstaking exploration of her new domain. She cleared pathways through the main stable, piling debris into organized mounds. She was an archaeologist of her own small, ruined world. With each shovelful of ash, with each piece of rubble moved, the stable revealed more of its original character. She found rusted horseshoes, a broken harness buckle, the shattered remains of a lantern. They were ghosts of a life that had once filled this space. It was on the 3rd day, while clearing the largest of the former stalls at the front of the building, that she found it. The floor here was not stone, but packed earth, hardened by decades of use and neglect. As she scraped away the surface layer of ash and filth, her boot heel struck something that felt different. not the dull thud of earth, but a harder, more resonant sound. She stopped, her senses suddenly on high alert. She knelt down, running her hand over the spot. The ground was cold and firm, but here, in a roughly 4-foot square, it felt subtly different, denser. She tapped it with the handle of her shovel. It was unmistakable. A hollow sound. Her heart began to beat a little faster. She looked closer, examining the perimeter of the stall. It was formed by massive, rough-hewn blocks of granite, the kind her grandfather had taught her to split. Her eyes traced the mortar lines, gray and weathered with age. Then she saw it. One of the blocks, set low into the foundation of the stall divider, was a slightly different shade of gray, its surface less pitted by time. The mortar joint around it was finer, almost too perfect. It was newer. This was the anomaly. A single note played out of key in a familiar song, a detail that did not belong. Her grandfather's voice was in her ear again. "Things are never what they seem on the surface, Ellie. Always look for the maker's mark, the hidden seam." This was a seam. A thrill, sharp and electric, shot through her. It was a mixture of fear and exhilarating curiosity. She took a small pry bar from her satchel. With delicate precision, she began to chip away at the fine mortar line. It came away easily, crumbling into dust, unlike the iron-hard mortar of the surrounding stones. It was a facade, meant to look old, but lacking the true bond of time. After 10 minutes of careful work, she had cleared the entire seam around the stone. There, tucked into a recess on the underside, her fingers found it. A cold, flat ring of forged iron, set flush with the stone. It was a handle. Her breath caught in her throat. She took a firm grip, planted her feet, and pulled. The stone was immensely heavy, groaning in protest. It scraped against its neighbors, the sound of granite on granite echoing in the silent ruin. But it moved. It was not a foundation block. It was a door, a lid, a perfectly disguised trapdoor made of solid stone. With a final, desperate heave, she swung the stone lid upward and over, revealing a dark, square opening in the floor. A set of steep stone steps led down into blackness. The air that rose to meet her was not the damp, musty air of a forgotten cellar. It was cool, dry, and still, like the air of a sealed tomb. She retrieved the broken lantern she had found, filled it with oil from a small flask in her bag, and lit the wick. The flame flickered, casting a weak, trembling glow. Holding it aloft, she descended into the earth beneath the stable. The steps led into a small, square room, no more than 10 feet by 10 feet. It was lined with the same masterfully cut stone as the stable's foundation. The air was clean. On one wall, a simple, sturdy desk had been built into the stone, a wooden chair neatly tucked beneath it. On another, shelves held sealed tins and jars. But it was the center of the room that drew her eye. There sat 3 canvas-bound chests, reinforced with iron straps. They were not locked. With a hand that trembled slightly, Alara knelt and unlatched the nearest chest. She lifted the heavy lid. Her lantern light fell upon a sight that made her gasp. Gold. The chest was filled to the brim with gold coins, heavy, lustrous discs of metal, minted with eagles in the face of liberty. It was a fortune, a king's ransom. She ran her fingers through them, the metallic clink and slide a sound from a dream. She opened the other 2 chests. They were the same. Stunned, she sat back on her heels, the sheer reality of it too much to comprehend. This was the source of the rumors, the treasure of the ghost. It was real. After several minutes, her gaze fell upon the desk. Lying in the center of the clean, dust-free surface was a single object, a thick, leather-bound logbook. She picked it up. The leather was supple, the pages crisp. The handwriting inside was a strong, clear script. She turned to the first page. "My name is Silas Kane," it began, "and this stable is my testimony." She sat in the single wooden chair, the lantern casting a pool of warm light, and began to read. The logbook told a story that mirrored her own in its themes of loss and betrayal. Silas Kane had been a master mason in a city far to the east, renowned for his skill. He had taken on a partner, a man with a silver tongue and a gift for finance, who had promised to build an empire with him. Instead, the partner had systematically embezzled their funds, framed Silas for fraud, and ruined his name. Cheated, shamed, and legally exiled, Silas had wandered west, a man with nothing but his skills and the small portion of his wealth he had managed to hide. He had arrived in Terminus and built the livery stable. He described the process in loving, meticulous detail: the choosing of the stones, the squaring of the great timbers, the satisfaction of creating something true and solid in a world of lies. The stable was not just a business, it was his sanctuary, a fortress of competence built against the memory of his betrayal. He had lived a solitary life, respected for his work but never truly known. He had no family, no heir, section. And so he had built this secret room to house the last of his fortune. The final entry, dated nearly 40 years prior, was written in a slightly shakier hand. It was a letter to the future, to the one who finds this. It read, "If you are reading these words, it means you have found my secret. I do not know who you are, or how you came to be in my stable. But I know this: you did not find it by chance. You found it because you have eyes that see beyond the surface. You found it because you understand the language of stone and shadow. If you have the wit to find this door, you have the soul to steward what is behind it. I was cheated of a legacy. My name was stolen, my life's work undone. Let this be yours. Do not let it sit in the dark. Use it. Build a life here. Repair what is broken. Do not let the wolves of this world win. This place was my salvation. May it be yours as well." Sitting in the cool, silent dark, surrounded by a dead man's fortune, Elara finally wept. The hollow calm that had encased her since her expulsion shattered. She cried for her grandfather, for the lost home on the bluff, for the coldness of her stepmother. But mostly, she cried for Silas Kane, this stranger across time who had seen her, who had understood her without ever knowing her name. He had left her more than gold. He had left her a purpose, a blessing. When the tears subsided, a new feeling took their place, a deep, quiet resolve. The gold gave her the means, but Silas's letter gave her the mission. She would not just survive here, she would build. She would honor the legacy of the man who built this place, and the man who had taught her how. The next morning, Elara emerged from the ruin not as a refugee, but as a proprietor. The work of restoration began in earnest. She drew up a list, her script as neat and precise as her grandfather had taught her. Lumber of specific dimensions, lime for mortar, bags of nails, window glass, forged iron for fittings. It was a long list. Her first stop was the general store. The owner was a woman named Martha, sturdy and sharp-eyed, who watched Elara with a mixture of pity and curiosity. When Elara approached the counter and began to read from her list, Martha's expression shifted. This was not the shopping list of a vagrant. It was a builder's manifest. "That's a lot of lumber," Martha said, her tone neutral. "Gonna cost you." "I can pay," Elara said simply. From her satchel, she produced one of the $100 notes from her stepmother. It was the first time she had touched the money. Using it to build felt like an act of defiance, of reclaiming her own narrative. Martha's eyes widened slightly at the sight of the bill, but she recovered quickly. "Freight wagon comes through on Tuesday. I can have it here for you." The next visit was to the blacksmith's forge at the other end of town. The smith was a mountain of a man named Jonas, with a beard like a spade and arms thick as fence posts. He was hammering a glowing piece of iron on his anvil, the ringing blows echoing down the street. Elara waited patiently until he was finished. He plunged the iron into a slack tub with a great hiss of steam and turned to her, his face grimed with soot. "What?" he grunted. Instead of speaking, Ilara unrolled a piece of paper on a workbench. On it were detailed drawings, complete with precise measurements, for a series of heavy-duty hinges, hasps, and support braces. They were her own designs, drawn from her grandfather's lessons on load-bearing and stress points. Jonas picked up the drawing. His expression of gruff impatience slowly transformed into one of grudging respect. He squinted at the numbers, running a thick finger over the lines. He understood this language. "This is good work," he said. It was not a compliment. It was a professional assessment. "Who drew this?" "I did," Ilara said. He looked at her, then back at the drawing, then back at her. He nodded slowly. "A week," he grunted, and turned back to his forge. It was the beginning of an alliance, forged not in words, but in a mutual respect for competence. When the lumber arrived, the real work began. The sheer scale of the task was daunting. She was one person, and the ruin was immense. But her grandfather had taught her how to solve immense problems, one small, perfect piece at a time. She started with the tack room, her shelter. She built a new roof frame, hewing the beams herself with a broad axe she bought from Martha. She learned the rhythm of it, the swing of the axe, the way the blade bit into the wood. It was brutal, exhausting work, but with every clean cut, she felt more alive. She raised the new rafters using a block and tackle system, a simple machine of ropes and pulleys that multiplied her strength, another lesson from the workshop on the bluff. She laid the roof boards, her hammer blows falling in a steady, metronomic rhythm. The sounds of construction, of creation, began to replace the silence of decay. The town watched. From a distance at first, the men who had mocked her in the store would fall silent as she walked past. The clerk who had sold her the deed now found reasons to be busy whenever she entered his office to file a new survey line she had drawn. Her quiet, relentless industry was a rebuke to their cynicism. An old trapper named Abel, a man as weathered as the landscape, began to observe her from a rise outside of town. He would sit for hours, watching her work. One afternoon, he walked down to the stable. He was lean and wiry, his face a roadmap of wrinkles. He didn't offer help, knowing she wouldn't accept charity. Instead, he offered knowledge. "That north wall takes the worst of the winter wind," he said, pointing with a gnarled finger. "When you chink the stones, mix pine pitch in with your mortar. Seals it against the damp." He then told her of a clay deposit down by the creek that was perfect for making daub. He was sharing a piece of his own competence, a gift of equal footing. Ilara nodded, accepting the advice with a quiet, "Thank you." The community, such as it was, began to form around her, not through social niceties, but through these small, practical acts of mutual respect. When Ilara went to Martha's store, there was often a hot meat pie set aside for her. "Might as well eat," Martha would say gruffly, refusing payment. When she took her axe and saw blades to Jonas for sharpening, he would often find other tools of hers that needed dressing and do them without being asked, handing them back with a simple nod. One morning, Ilara found a string of fresh-caught trout lying on her doorstep. She knew they were from Abel. That evening, she left a small, perfectly carved wooden box on the rise where he sat, filled with fresh bread. It was a silent, ongoing conversation of traded skills. Slowly, methodically, the stable was reborn. She rebuilt the collapsed stone walls, her hands growing calloused and strong. She used her grandfather's plumb bob for every course of stone, ensuring each wall was absolutely true. She milled her own flooring from the massive timbers that had survived the fire, planing them smooth by hand. She built stalls, not for horses, but as partitioned spaces for a future workshop and storage. The great central space where carriages once stood, she left open, its floor now made of smooth, polished flagstones she had cut and set herself. A massive stone hearth, modeled on the one from her grandfather's house, now dominated one wall. The man from the general store, the one who had called her purchase a pile of charred sticks, walked past one day and stopped, staring. The ruin was gone. In its place stood a structure that was both old and new, its lines clean and strong, its presence solid and undeniable. He just shook his head and walked on, his mockery silenced by the simple, irrefutable fact of her work. As autumn deepened, turning the prairie grasses to gold, the work was nearly complete. The stable was no longer a ruin. It was a home, a fortress. Winter arrived not as a gradual cooling, but as an assault. The sky turned the color of lead, and a wind rose from the north, howling like a hungry wolf. Then the snow began, thick and relentless. The old-timers called it a blizzard of remembrance, the kind that came once a decade to remind everyone who was truly in charge. Terminus hunkered down, smoke from every chimney battling against the gale. Inside her restored livery, Alara was warm and secure. The north wall, chinked with pine pitch as Abel had advised, held fast against the wind's fury. The roof, which she had triple-checked, did not leak or groan. The fire she had built in the great stone hearth blazed, filling the vast open space with a steady, comforting warmth. For the first time, she felt the deep, profound peace of being truly safe in a place she had made with her own hands. On the second day of the storm, a crisis erupted. A family of homesteaders, traveling late in the season, had been caught on the open prairie. Their wagon had thrown a wheel, and they were stranded, their canvas cover no match for the blizzard's teeth. Jonas and Abel, checking their trap lines near the edge of town, found them huddled together, half frozen and desperate. The town had no inn, and the small cabins of the blacksmith and the trapper were not large enough to house a family of 5. It was Jonas who thought of the livery. He led the shivering family, the father carrying the youngest child, through the blinding snow to Alara's door. He pounded on the heavy oak door she had built. "Alara! Open up!" She opened it to the maelstrom. She saw Jonas, his beard caked with ice, and behind him, the pale, frightened faces of the family. She did not hesitate. She swung the door wide. "Get them inside," she said, her voice calm and clear over the shriek of the wind. She led them to the hearth, wrapping the children in warm blankets she had woven herself. The sheer size of the livery's main room, once a liability, was now a blessing. There was more than enough space. The mother wept with relief, her tears freezing on her cheeks as she stepped into the warmth. For 3 days, the storm raged, cutting Terminus off from the world. Alara's home became the town's impromptu sanctuary. The father of the stranded family, a farmer named Thomas, explained that his wagon's axle bracket had snapped. "Can't be fixed without a forge," he said, his voice heavy with defeat. "Bring me the part," Alara said. He and Jonas retrieved it, a heavy, fractured piece of iron. In the workshop section of her stable, Alara fired up a small forge she had built into the corner, a smaller version of Jonas's own. With Thomas looking on in disbelief and Jonas watching with a critical eye, she heated the metal, hammered it back into shape, and expertly welded the crack using a borax flux. She had learned the basics of smithing from watching Jonas, her keen eye absorbing the details of his craft. She then drilled new bolt holes and tempered the piece, plunging it into a barrel of oil. It was a perfect, professional repair. Thomas was speechless. Jonas just grunted, a sound that, from him, was the highest form of praise. During those 3 days, a new kind of community was forged in the stable, born of shared crisis and mutual aid. Martha braved the storm to bring a crate of food. Abel appeared with 2 rabbits he had snared. They were a small, functional unit, and Alara, the quiet outsider, was their anchor. Her competence, once a private fortress, had become a public good. When the storm finally broke, the world was a pristine, silent landscape of white. The family, their wagon repaired, their bodies and spirits restored, prepared to leave. Thomas tried to pay Alara, but she refused. "The hearth is for sharing," she said, echoing something her grandfather used to say. The farmer's wife, her eyes full of gratitude, simply pressed a small, crudely stitched doll into Ilara's hand. "For your own hearth," she whispered. Spring came, and with it, a sense of renewal. The livery stood complete, a testament to resilience, its new wood weathering to a soft gray that blended with the old stone. It was a beautiful, profoundly functional building, part home, part workshop, and, as the blizzard had proven, part sanctuary. Ilara had found Silas Kane's ledgers in the cellar, which detailed the name of his treacherous partner. She sent a letter to the authorities in the eastern city, along with a copy of the relevant pages, not for vengeance, but for truth. It was a debt owed to Silas's memory. One quiet evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple across the prairie, Ilara stood at her workbench, the light from the large western window falling across her hands. She was planing a length of cedar, the blade whispering across the wood, releasing its clean, spicy scent into the air. The motions were second nature now, a part of her. On a shelf above the bench, her two inheritances sat side by side. One was her grandfather's brass plumb bob, its surface gleaming with a soft, warm luster, a symbol of the skill that had been passed into her hands. Next to it sat a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a forgotten whittling project she had found at the bottom of one of Silas Kane's chests. It was a symbol of the sanctuary she had been given, the tool and the treasure, competence and opportunity, together. She looked out the window, across the greening prairie toward the small cluster of lights that was Terminus. She felt a deep, abiding peace, a feeling of being perfectly placed in the world. She was not the outcast, the orphan, the girl with $2 to her name. She was Ilara of the stone stable. She was a builder. She was a neighbor. She was home. The paltry sum from her stepmother, the gold in the cellar, they were just resources. Her true inheritance was the unwavering belief, gifted to her by two men she had loved, one in life and one in death, that a person's worth was not in what they had, but in what they could build with their own two hands. The $2 silver she had slid across that dusty counter had not bought a ruin. They had bought a future. They were, without a single doubt, the best money she had ever spent.